The morning my grandmother was buried, my brother changed the locks before the reception was over. I remember standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing out the last of the teacups because that is what you do when someone dies and you don't know what else to do with your hands. My aunt was still in the living room, the pastor had just left. And my brother Marcus walked in through the back door, set a small brass key on the counter beside me, and said, very quietly, "We're going to need you out by the end of the week." I didn't say anything, I just looked at the key. Then I looked at him. He didn't look away. That was the moment I understood that grief was not the hardest thing I would feel that week. My grandmother's name was Ruth Eleanor Mackenzie, and she was 79 years old when she died, and she had lived in the same house in Wolfville, Nova Scotia for 51 years. It was a white farmhouse with green shutters and a wraparound porch that sagged a little on the east side, and she had never once gotten around to fixing it because she said she liked the way it tilted toward the apple trees. She had a garden in the back that she tended until the spring of her last year, and a workshop in the basement where she repaired antique clocks for people all over the valley, and a reputation in town so solid that when she walked into the hardware store on Main Street, the owner would stop whatever he was doing just to say hello. She had raised me. That's the part I need you to understand before anything else. My mother, her daughter, left when I was 4, not dramatically, not with a fight, she just one day was there, and then she was not, and my grandmother drove to Dartmouth to pick me up from a neighbor's house where I'd been waiting for 2 days, and she brought me home and put me in the blue bedroom at the top of the stairs and never once made me feel like a burden. I grew up eating her biscuits on Sunday mornings and helping her wind the clocks every Thursday evening, and learning, slowly, that steadiness is not the same thing as coldness. My grandmother was the steadiest person I have ever known. She didn't say I love you very often, but she showed up for everything. Every school concert, every hospital appointment, every 2 a.m. phone call when I was 22, and living in Halifax and convinced I had made every wrong choice there was to make. She showed up. My brother Marcus was her grandson too, but in a different way. He was my mother's son from a later relationship, and he had grown up in Ontario with his father's family. He'd come to Wolfville maybe 6 or 7 times in his life before our grandmother got sick. When she was diagnosed with congestive heart failure 2 years ago, he started calling more. Then he started visiting. Then he started staying for longer stretches at a time. And I noticed, and I told myself I was being uncharitable, and I went back to my job at the hospital in Kentville, where I worked as a registered nurse, and tried to believe that people could change and families could come together around dying. I want to be honest with you about that. I tried very hard to believe it. I had moved back into the farmhouse 18 months before my grandmother died. She had asked me to, and I had said yes without hesitating, because that was the only answer I could imagine giving her. I arranged a leave from my unit, eventually switched to part-time, and spent those 18 months learning a different kind of caregiving than the clinical kind. The kind where you sit with someone through the night not because it's your shift but because they are afraid of the dark in a way they'd never admitted to anyone before. The kind where you learn someone's pain schedule better than your own and you start sleeping light all the time and you forget what it feels like to have an evening to yourself, and you don't mind, or mostly you don't mind, because the person you're caring for is the same person who once drove 4 hours in a February snowstorm to sit with you through your first nursing exam results. Marcus visited 3 times during those 18 months. Each visit was longer than the last. By the final one, he was staying in the guest room and suggesting renovations and asking our grandmother questions about the house that, looking back, were less about curiosity and more about inventory. I noticed. I told myself I was being uncharitable. Our grandmother, in those last months, was not always clear in the way she used to be. The medication made her foggy in the afternoons. Sometimes she would talk about people who had been dead for decades as though they'd just left the room. But in the mornings, she was still herself sharp and dry and particular about things in the way that only people with real standards ever are, and in those morning hours she talked to me about a lot of things. She talked about the house. She talked about the clocks in the basement. She talked about the apple trees and what she wanted done with them. She also talked about her estate. "I have been clear about everything," she told me one October morning, about 4 months before she died. She was sitting up in bed with her tea, looking out at the garden. "I want you to know that. The lawyer has the document. It says exactly what I intend." I told her I trusted her. "I know you do," she said. "That's not why I'm telling you. I'm telling you because I want you to read it. All of it. The whole thing. Don't let anyone summarize it for you." I told her I would. I thought she was just being thorough. She was always thorough. She died on a Tuesday in February, which felt right, somehow not dramatic, not a holiday, just a quiet weekday morning with frost on the windows and the particular stillness that comes before the world gets going. I was with her. I held her hand and I watched her breathing slow and then stop, and I sat there for a long time afterward because I didn't know what came next, and also because I was not ready to walk back out into a world where she wasn't in it. Marcus arrived the same day. He had apparently booked a flight the week before, which I didn't ask about. The days that followed were full in the way that grief days are, full arrangements and calls and casseroles left on the porch and the relentless administration of death, which no one warns you about, and which is somehow both numbing and exhausting at the same time. My grandmother had a lot of friends in Wolfville. The reception after the funeral filled the farmhouse in a way it hadn't been filled in years, and I moved through it doing what she had taught me to do, which was to make sure everyone else had what they needed. It was during the reception that Marcus set the key on the counter. "End of the week," he said. I found out later, talking to my aunt, that he had already spoken to a real estate agent. He had apparently been under the impression that the estate was straightforward, house and contents to be divided equally between the two surviving grandchildren. Quick sale, split the proceeds. He had told the agent he expected to list within 60 days. He had read the first page of the will, maybe the second. He had gotten to the part where our names appeared and the house was mentioned, and he had, apparently, stopped there. I left the farmhouse that evening with a duffel bag and my nursing bag and a box of photographs I had taken from the hall table when no one was watching. I didn't fight him. I didn't make a scene at the reception. I went to my friend Carolyn's house in Kentville, where she made me tea and let me sleep in her spare room, and I lay awake most of that night staring at the ceiling and thinking about the last conversation I'd had with my grandmother about the will. "Read it," she had said. "All of it. Don't let anyone summarize it for you." The next morning I called the lawyer. His name was Mr. Tremblay, and he had been my grandmother's solicitor for over 20 years, and when I told him who I was, he went very quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Miss Mackenzie, I've been waiting for your call. I do need to ask you something first. Did your brother read the entire will?" I told him I didn't know. "I see," he said. "I think we need to meet. I want to explain something about how my grandmother thought, because it's important. She was not a dramatic person. She did not do things for effect or to prove a point or to punish people. When she made a decision, she made it carefully, and then she committed to it fully, and she did not revisit it unless new information genuinely warranted it. She had been working with Mr. Tremblay on her estate documents for years, and she had updated them twice in the 5 years before she died, and each update had been deliberate. The will, as Mr. Tremblay laid it out for me across his desk in his office on Main Street 3 days after the funeral, was 8 pages long. The first 2 pages were relatively standard. The house and its contents were indeed to pass to her grandchildren, Marcus and me, as joint inheritors. A car, a small checking account, some personal items designated to specific people. If you read only those 2 pages, you would think you had the whole picture. Page 3 was where my grandmother had been thorough. The inheritance of the house was conditional. The property could not be sold for a period of 5 years from the date of her death. During that period, it was to remain in operation as a working household, maintained according to a specific standard she had outlined, and this was the part that caught in my throat when I read it. It was to be occupied by the grandchild who had provided primary caregiving in the final 2 years of her life, that occupancy to be formally established within 30 days of her death. There was a statutory declaration attached. Mr. Tremblay had prepared it. It documented, in detail, the caregiving arrangement of the previous 18 months, my leave from nursing, my residency in the house, the medical records I had signed, the pharmacy accounts in my name, the home care coordinator reports that listed me as the primary contact. Every piece of it was already there. My grandmother had made sure of it. The final page of the will contained a letter. It was addressed to both Marcus and me, but I think she knew, when she wrote it, which of us would need it more. "I have not done this to cause pain," she wrote. "I have done this because the house is not only a property, it is a place that has held people through hard things, and it deserves to continue doing that. It was cared for faithfully, and it should go to someone who will care for it in the same way. I believe you both know who that is. I also want you to know this. Whatever you do with what I have left you, do it with your whole chest. Don't be small about it. Don't let the money make you smaller than you are." Marcus called me that afternoon. Mr. Tremblay had reached him first. The call was not easy. He was angry in the way that people get angry when they have already spent money they didn't yet have, when they have already told the real estate agent, and probably also themselves, a story that turned out not to be true. He said things that I am not going to repeat here because they belong to the worst version of him, and I don't think the worst version of anyone is the most honest version. I let him talk. I had learned, from 18 months of night shifts and hard mornings, how to be in the room with someone else's pain without taking it on as my own. When he was done, I said, "I'm sorry this isn't what you expected." He hung up. I stood in the parking lot of Mr. Tremblay's building and looked at the bare February trees along Main Street, and I thought about my grandmother telling me she'd been clear about everything, and I thought about the way she had pressed my hand before I left her room the last night I sat with her, and I thought about the key Marcus had set on the counter while the reception was still going. I thought, I could be hard about this. I could let the anger do what it wants to do. And then I thought about the letter. Don't let the money make you smaller than you are. I moved back into the farmhouse the following week. It was strange to be there without her. The clocks in the basement still needed winding. She had kept about 11 of them in various states of restoration, and I did it the first Thursday back because it was Thursday and that was what you did. And I stood in the basement among the half-open clock cases, and the smell of old oil and metal, and I cried for a long time. Not about the house, about her, about the particular way she had lived in it, which I was only now starting to understand I had absorbed without realizing. I called Marcus about 3 weeks later. He didn't answer. I left a message saying that when he was ready to talk I was here, and that I wasn't interested in fighting, and that whatever our grandmother had wanted was what I intended to do. He didn't call back for 2 months. When he did, his voice was different, quieter. He asked if he could come and see the place. I said yes. He drove down from Toronto on a Saturday in May, and I made coffee, and we sat on the porch, the one that tilts toward the apple trees, and we didn't talk about the will for most of the morning. We talked about our mother, which we had never actually done before, not honestly. We talked about what it had been like for each of us to grow up the way we had grown up, in different cities, with different absences. It was not a comfortable conversation. It was the most honest one we had ever had. He apologized for the key. I believed him. I did not give him a share of the house. That was not mine to give, it was my grandmother's decision, and she had made it for reasons that I understood better every day I spent in that farmhouse, reasons that had nothing to do with punishing anyone and everything to do with what a place is for. But I told him he was welcome there, that the porch was here, that the kitchen was here, that the spare room at the top of the stairs was here, if he ever needed it. He nodded and looked out at the apple trees for a long time. The 5 years have not passed yet. I'm still here, in the farmhouse with the green shutters and the tilted porch. I went back to full-time nursing in the fall, at a hospital in Windsor now, which is close enough that I can still be home for supper most nights, and lock up the house properly, and wind the clocks on Thursday evenings the way she taught me. I kept one of the clocks running on her bedside table. It's a small carriage clock with a silver case, and she repaired it herself about 30 years ago, and it keeps almost perfect time. Every morning when I come downstairs it is ticking in the hallway, steady and even, the way she was. I've been asked, since then, whether I felt like I won something. I don't think that's the right word for it. I didn't win the house. I kept it. There's a difference. Winning implies someone else lost, and I don't think about it that way. Even now, even knowing everything that Marcus did in those first few days. What I think I really inherited, was something my grandmother spent 51 years building. And it wasn't the property or the clock collection, or even the particular slant of afternoon light across the kitchen floor. It was the understanding that steadiness is a practice, that showing up, consistently, without needing anyone to see you do it, is a kind of love that leaves a mark long after you're gone. She left me the house because she knew I would take care of it, but the thing she actually left me was the knowledge that I could. There's one more thing I want to tell you, because I think it matters. A few months after I moved back in, I found an envelope in the back of her bedside table drawer that I hadn't noticed before. It was sealed and had my name on it in her handwriting. Inside was a single index card, the kind she used for her clock repair notes, and on it in her precise small print she had written, "The apple trees need pruning in late March. Use the long-handled shears, not the short ones. And don't let anyone tell you the porch needs to be leveled. It's fine the way it is. It was always fine the way it was." I still have the card. It's pinned above the kitchen window where the light hits it in the morning. I look at it every day.